Welcome back, everyone, to our modding series with regards to Motorsport Manager. Now, in the first video, our introductory video, I went over some of the things that you can adjust and showed you what it looks like in the game whenever you make those adjustments. We looked at tier 1, 2, and 3, some adjustments that I made to the rules, as well as HQ buildings and some dependencies on when you can build them and how much they cost, and so on. This video now takes the series behind the scenes and lets you know how I made those changes by showing you exactly which files that I went in, which files I needed to open in order to get to where I can make those changes. So to start off with, a couple of housekeeping items. As I mentioned in the introductory video, the quickest way if you're interested in getting started with modding in Motorsport Manager is to do a quick Google search. And what you're going to find there is it's more than likely going to take you to racedepartment.com, and they have a section in the forums devoted to modding. There's a lot of great posts there from a lot of very devoted people who are very good at modding. You're going to find a lot of graphical mods. You're going to find some balance mods. You're going to find all sorts of stuff that is obviously very well done. What I'm going to show you is sort of the behind the scenes part of that. So if you're just interested in downloading mods, honestly, I would recommend that you wait until the workshop comes out. But if you want to see behind the scenes, behind the curtain, and get an idea of what you can change very quickly and very easily, quite frankly, for yourself in the meantime, then that's what we're going to try and really cover in these remaining videos. So let's start out with what are you going to need in order to make this happen? Okay, you're going to need something called the Asset Bundle Extractor. And the reason you're going to need this is because, without going into too terribly much detail, Motorsport Manager was made in Unity. Unity is a game engine that a lot of people are familiar with. It's very popular with indie developers. And there is an extractor. And because of this popularity, there's a lot of tools available for it. So one of the tools is an asset bundle extractor. Actually, I believe this came from and is related to the 7 Days to Die game. So again, if you're doing a search, you're going to come across these types of terms. So don't be, afraid. This is where you're supposed to be. It's a Unity extractor. Okay, so if we look in here, you've got various setups and some extra files that I've added along the way as I'm playing around with different things. Okay, so we'll come back to that in just a moment. Also, what you see in a couple of the other folders in here are some things that I've downloaded directly from racedepartment.com just to see how these work. The stats editor is a great way if you just want to make some quick edits without getting your hands dirty in the files themselves. This is a quick program that gives you a graphical interface in an easier way to do that. The randomizer is the program that I referenced in the introductory video where I talked about how I used a program, again, on racedepartment.com to completely randomize all of the drivers and all of the staff members, and that includes your race engineers and your developers for the car. It completely randomizes those, gives them randomized traits and strengths and weaknesses and so on. So essentially, every time you use these randomized files, you get a completely different playthrough because you're going to get completely different people. For example, if I open up, these are the files that it creates. If we take just a moment, we open up, you can see, do you want to generate random drivers? I've checked the box. Random staff, check the box. And then you can do your distribution of, you could go all female, all male, or anything in between. And then you've got some options for drivers and staff, which I'm not terribly up to date on as far as what these actually do. So I just stick with, in general, the random. So a lot of good can be had from just using that. This will make every time you start a new career fresh and exciting because you'll be dealing with all new staff rather than the staff you're already familiar with and all of the people that you know that you would like to go and get for drivers and staff. Okay, and then it generates these files for you, and then we'll take a look a little bit later on at how you use these files and actually get them into the game to be used. Okay, so let's take a look at the beginnings here. So you've got your asset bundle extractor. You've got it installed. Again, I'm not going to be going through that whole process and where you get it, how you get it, and all that. You can do that with a quick Google search, and racedepartment.com is going to help you out a lot with that. But once you get it, and once you get things installed, we're going to be dealing with the resource.assets file. This is where everything that I've changed has come from this file. Now, obviously, this is just one file, and you can see the size of it. So it's got several things inside. There's graphical pieces in there. There's text files in there. There's all sorts of stuff in there. Okay, but this is the one file within the Motorsport Manager game that we're going to be using. And what you see on the right-hand side of the screen is the folder where this file is contained. So if you go under wherever you have Steam installed on your system, then go under Steam Apps, Common, Motorsport Manager, and then in the mm_data file, and you scroll down, again, you can see there's lots of stuff in here. Okay, but if you scroll down, you will eventually find the resource.assets file. And as I mentioned in the introductory video, and I'm going to re-emphasize here, and hopefully I'll remember to do it in every video, always, always, always make backups. You can see here, I've got one that I've made a copy of the original and then renamed it original so that I would always know that that is a copy. Then I've also got other copies as well. So be safe. Anything you change before you make any changes, always make backups. So this is the file we need, and I've simply copied it over to here. And the way I've been doing it is rather than making changes and saving them directly into the game files, I've been saving them here and then drag and drop over into the game files themselves. That way I have that extra step just to make sure that I'm ready to overwrite the game files. You can see a backup folder here where I've got yet another copy of the original resource file. So what are you going to do with this? Well, whenever you get into the bundler, you'll see that there is an extractor here, okay? In the midst of all the stuff you've got here, and again, you'll want to read the directions on what you're going to be doing with this stuff, but if you open up the extractor, you can see a very basic interface opens up. We'll go to File, Open, and then what do we want to open? Well, what we're looking for is this resource assets file, so we're going to click Open on that, and then give it a second, and here we go. Now I'm going to expand this a little bit so we can see, but this is what's located, all the files that are inside this resource.assets file. Okay, and you can see there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. There are game objects in here, and then as you continue going on down, you'll see there's animations in here and various other things. Okay, mono behavior or script behaviors. So you got all sorts of stuff, and part of what you have in here are text files. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to play around a little bit with that. So we're going to organize everything by name. And then we're going to look for, you start typing in things that you're interested in, or you could simply organize this by type and then find your text. Okay, all right. So as you scroll down through here, finally, you can find text assets. And thankfully, the way these are all named makes a lot of them fairly self-explanatory. And what you're going to want to do is to start off with, and again, this is all in the directions of the program itself. The best thing to do is go ahead and get all of these and then do plugins, export to text, and then click OK. And what you're going to end up with as we get out of this program is you're going to end up with a couple of folders. One with data, and these are all of the text files we just saw that were inside of this resource.assets file. All of the text files that are in there. And then in modded files, these are all the ones that have been changed. You can see most of these I've not touched. Okay, so most of these remain unchanged. This is simply when I originally did the extraction on the files. Okay, so you can see that with just a few text files, I've made quite a few changes to the game experience itself, and quite frankly, enough to make the game fun over and over for yourself by simply making some small tweaks every time you do a new playthrough. All right, so what we're going to look at in this particular video, again, I want to keep these videos fairly short. I don't want them to be an hour long. I don't want them to be 45 minutes long. I want them to be fairly short and hone in on one or two particular files so that they can be easy reference in case you want to come back to them later and not have to scroll through an entire video. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out with what I believe is the one file. If you're not going to do anything else, but you want to make some changes, then this is the file you want. Single seater design data. And I'm going to go ahead and make this full screen. This has a ton of information in it and a ton of things that you can change that will really affect the game all in this one file. So let's go ahead and work our way through it. Now, the stuff at the top gives you some general information, such as we're going to be able to control the speeds of the car. It lets us know that all time costs that we're going to see related down below are in seconds per lap. Okay, so we'll know where that goes. And then we're going to talk about session length for the different races. And then we're going to talk a lot about tires. So all of that stuff is in here, and it's broken apart very nicely by the developers so that it's easily readable by us. Okay, and the first section here is race length distances. And right off the bat, here they are. Okay, so, and it shows you short race length in miles. So this is not laps, these are in miles. So what I've done is I've made the changes to where short races for me are now 70 miles. And then we go to 150 for medium, and then finally 250 for the long races. And again, as I mentioned in the previous video, I've tested as high as I believe 500 miles here. So you've got some options on just how long you want the races to be. Now, my idea was to put the short race length be what I wanted for tier 3, and then medium for tier 2, and then finally the long race distance in for tier 1. And the reason being because while you're in career mode, you can always go into preferences and change the length of the races that you want. So that's sort of the idea behind why I chose what I chose here. All right, next you get into the modifiers for short, medium, and long, and I've not really messed with these. These, if I remember correctly, are still the defaults. Okay, so I've not really messed with these. What I got into here was what I needed. Okay, so moving on, then you get into real world car stats. All right, and by default, these are a little bit out of the comfort zone for me. You got top speed in mile per hour. What I've done is I've set it at 250 miles an hour. Okay, and what that is essentially this is the top speed that the maximum tier 1 car should ever reach, if I'm understanding this correctly. Meaning that the end of the longest straightaway on the longest track, this is your sort of your terminal velocity for the tier 1 car, which is, by the way the game is designed, tier 1 is intended to be the fastest, tier 2 a little bit slower than that, and then tier 3 slower still than that. But we'll get to that more here in just a moment. So by default, this is over 300 miles an hour. I believe it's 320 or maybe 340 miles an hour. Now, at first, you may have noticed in the game while you're playing the game that whenever you get to the end of a straightaway on a track, right above your driver, it will show the speed that they were going, sort of the end of a speed trap. And I've seen in tier 1 up around 289, 290, and maybe even a little bit higher than that. So huge numbers. So I wanted to bring that down. And then after testing, I realized a lot why they probably raised it up a little more. And the reason is, this is basically your terminal velocity. If I'm understanding this correctly, this is your terminal velocity, meaning that obviously whenever you get to tier 1, you're going to start out with a low car, and then there are going to be teams with much better cars. What this is referring to is whenever you reach the highest possible car, you have maxed out, you've probably been working on, say, engines and everything else for multiple seasons, and you've got it maxed out just to the point where it's ready to reset the grid, okay, and reset all the parts. Whenever you reach that point, this is the max speed that the fastest car should be possibly able to turn at the end of a straightaway. Okay, so that's why I think they put it a little bit higher. They put it out of reach. I mean, obviously, we're not going to be seeing Formula One cars per the game, the way the game is set up. The Tier 1 is their Formula One division. We're not going to be seeing Formula One cars in real life getting up over 300 miles an hour on the straightaway. But I think they did that so it gives you something a little bit beyond reach. Plus, you also have to keep in mind that the faster the cars go on the track, the quicker the races go, whether you're in regular speed or in fast forward, as I play on. So it makes the races go a little bit faster. So you have to make a determination here. Am I going for ultra realism? I don't want the cars to go any faster than they absolutely do right now in real life. Or do you want to fudge on that a little bit to make the races go by a little quicker? So you have to make some decisions here. So I've put it at 250 right now. Again, that's a number that I've changed a few times, and I'm not really married to any particular number, but just keep that in mind when you're thinking about changing that number. All right, acceleration. I'm not sure what units they're using for this, but the 12 for acceleration and 30 for braking are the defaults. I've not messed with those, again, unless I've changed these and forgotten. So I've left these as is, again, because for me, after doing some testing, I wanted to give, a little bit of extra speed to the cars so that the races move a little bit quicker. So I'm not as concerned with realism as I am with the races going just a little bit quicker, because one thing I noticed because at first I lowered this quite a bit and I was doing some testing for NASCAR type speeds. So I lowered these some by trying to figure out as best I could a rough estimation of the acceleration power of a NASCAR Cup car versus Formula One, and then same thing with the braking. And I tried to get some estimations in there, and then I played around with that. And what I found is the cars were just moving way too slow on the screen for me. Lap times may have been perfect and all that, but it just looked way too slow on the screen, and it was driving me crazy. So I've increased it back. And I'll come back to that more in the future whenever I decide to do more testing along those lines. Now, next we move on to how do Tier 2 and Tier 3 relate to Tier 1, because everything relates on Tier 1. Tier 1 is the rabbit you are chasing. Okay, we start out by what's the fastest possible that this rabbit can go? What's the top speed? What's the max acceleration? And how quick can it brake under max, fully upgraded conditions? Then everything else is based off of that. And it says Tier 2. All right, how far are they below the level? Now, we learned at the top that all time costs are in seconds per lap, okay? So now that we know that, we can come back down and look at this section. How many seconds slower per lap are the tiers below the top level? Okay, and here, Tier 2, 3 seconds slower per lap. And again, this is all maxed out. This is the best they're going to get. Tier 2 is going to be 3 seconds. Even if they're maxed out, they're going to be 3 seconds slower than the maxed out Tier 1 car per lap. And then Tier 3, now I've changed this by default. I believe this one is 5 and Tier 3 is 10, I believe. But I've made these a little bit closer, again, in the name of getting these cars to go a little bit faster on track so that the races go a little bit quicker, simply because it's more pleasing to my eye. To have, even in maximum fast forward, the cars were going by way too slow. So I've adjusted this to my own personal liking. If you're going for realism, then you would find out, okay, what are the Formula One cars going per lap? What are the Tier 2 cars going? How much slower are they per lap on the same track, same conditions? And then same thing, Tier 3. Okay, and then down below, it says the stats above control how fast the cars can possibly be. Again, max performance. Keep that in mind. It doesn't mean that when you're running Tier 1 laps that your car is automatically going to reach 250 at the straightaway, or acceleration is going to be 12, or your braking is going to be 30. That's not it. We're talking about possibilities, max performance. You got to keep that in mind. Okay, then we say, okay, fine. The time cost below now controls the worst a car can be compared to others. And then there you go. Okay, 20. So what it's saying is the fastest that a car can possibly be is 20 seconds better per lap now. 20 seconds better per lap than the absolute worst car. Okay, so again, There's something else you can change. If you want this to be less, if you want it to be more, there you go. Okay, then you've got some I haven't messed with this section at all, but you've got some modifiers in here that you can use to control the gap between the best and worst cars under certain conditions, such as individual conditions, such as top speed, acceleration, and so on. Okay, so let's move on to the next section. So now we've spent the first part of the file talking about how long do we want the race to be and what are the quickest that the cars can possibly be under perfect conditions, maximally upgraded as much as they possibly can be. Now, we're going to talk about the tires. Okay, and what we start off with in this section is talking about rain. Okay, when the track gets wet. Now, I don't know about you guys, but for me, that is a source of major frustration because I can never quite tell exactly when I need to go from dry weather to intermediates or exactly when I need to go from intermediates to wets. Now, I know there are some basic rules of thumb, but again, it's all judging by bars on a screen, so I can't exactly tell where 50% is or 60 or 40 or whatever. Well, here it's going to tell you. We start off with the minimum slick tread surface water range. Okay, so this was going to be 0. So if you're using the no treaded on the tires, no treaded tires, then the minimum obviously is going to be 0, no wetness on the track. Okay, what's the maximum that these tires are really useful? And that's at 0.12, which is 12%. Okay, so it tells us up here that 0.0 is a dry track and 1.0 is totally wet. So we know at 12% wetness, that's pretty much the most you want to be using a slick tread tire. Now, if we go to light tread, you want to start using those at a minimum of at 10% and a maximum wetness level of about 65%. Okay, so think of these, again, if I'm interpreting this correctly, these are your intermediate tires. So you've got your dry weather tires, you've got your intermediates, and then we're going to be talking next about the wet tires. Okay, so the maximum, according to this, would be you'd want to get off of intermediates at about 65%, if I'm reading that correctly. Now, what about your wet tires? Well, wet tires, the minimum would be at about 60% track wetness. Any lower than that, you're going to have problems. And how big of a problem? Well, we'll take a look at that here momentarily. Okay, and then the maximum that you'd want to use these tires, of course, goes all the way up to full wet conditions, totally wet on the track. Okay, so now that we've established the baseline for wetness on the track and which tires are appropriate for that, then we can talk about the tire compounds themselves. And we start off with the softest compound, which are the ultra softs. Okay, and then we get into at the very beginning, you get into the cliff. When do they fall off the cliff? Well, under two conditions. All right, first is under the condition of wear. All right, so as they're wearing, whenever they get to 0.2, which is 20% wear remaining on the tire. So at 20% tire, that's as low as you want to get these tires before they fall off the cliff as far as performance. Now, what does that mean? Well, here it is. Here's the time cost for being below 20%. The time cost is 8 seconds per lap. So you can see any advantage you might have gotten from being on the ultra soft tires will be completely gone very quickly once you get below 20% wear remaining on the tire, because at that point it's going to start costing you 8 seconds per lap. Okay, then we need to find out, okay, what happens if I'm using this in the wrong weather condition? Well, that's right here. If you're using this under the wrong weather condition, which meaning up here, this is our range here from 0 to 12%. So if we're using ultra soft tires and it's wetter than 12% on the track, then we're going to lose 20 seconds per lap, a monstrous penalty. Okay, then after that, I'm not going to go into too much detail here because we start getting into how does the temperature increase or decrease, how quickly does that happen, and things related to the weather. So I'm not really going to mess with that. So let's move on to the super softs, and we find the same thing. Okay, the super softs hit the cliff with 15% remaining wear on the tire, and their time cost is 8 seconds per lap if you go below this 15% threshold. That is invaluable information to know when you're going into a race weekend. That you know that if you're running super softs, I can get this tire all the way down to 15%, but I better not go any lower than that, or I'm going to suffer a huge penalty per lap on being on these, continuing to stay on these tires. Then we go through the same level, the same information in regards to the water level. And if you are on these tires beyond that threshold, which I think was what, 12%? I've already forgotten. Yeah, there we go. 12%. If it's wetter than 12% on the track and you're out on these, it's going to cost you 20 seconds per lap. And then we go through the same thing with some temperature and weather items. And then you go through the same thing. Softs, mediums, and then finally the hard tire. The interesting thing is to note for me is where do they hit the cliff? The softs hit the cliff at 10% wear remaining. The mediums, 5%. So you can wear these all the way down to only 5% wear remaining on the tire without falling off the cliff. And then the hard tires go all the way down to 0. There essentially is no cliff there. So whenever you get to full wear, whether you want to call that a flat tire or whatever, before then, you can wear it all the way down. So again, good information to know. Now, we also need to talk about the wet weather tires. So your inters have no cliff. Full wets have no cliff. Okay, but now what I found interesting here is where you get into the water level. Now you would think, okay, inters, you want to get on those. We found out at about 10% dampness or water level on the track, all the way up through about 60%, I believe it was. So what happens if you are on inters outside of those conditions, those wetness conditions? It's going to cost you 10 seconds per lap. Okay, but then the real interesting thing to me was when I came down to the full wets. What is the penalty for being on full wets below, I believe, 60% wetness on the track? And the penalty is huge, 20 seconds per lap. I would not have guessed that, quite frankly. I didn't think it was going to be quite that much. You can see it's double the penalty of being on inters. Okay, now that's all we're going to take a look at in this file, because once you get down below this, you're into specific information about the session length. So again, it's going to start here and it's going to talk about what is specifically going to happen when you're just using short races. Then beyond that's going to be medium races, and then finally long races, and so on. And what they're showing you is any adjustments it's going to make to things like the fuel burn rate, okay, some bonuses or negative impacts that are going to happen to various things. So it starts going through all of those, and we're not going to go through all of that, but you get the idea. Now you start talking about what happens during a short race, medium race, and a long race. So we're going to leave this video here. The video ended up being longer than I intended, but there's a whole lot of information to go on here. Plus, I wanted to cover some of the basics about how to get set up and what files you actually have access to from the bundle extractor, and then sort of the basic layout of how you're going to be working with some of these files and then moving them over into the game to be used. Again, keep in mind, any of these changes that you make and then move over the resources file, they're only going to take effect whenever you start a new career, a new save. You would need to edit the save file itself if you want to make any changes to an existing career, and I quite frankly don't recommend doing that because there's a lot of things that can go wrong, and you can end up with a career that you didn't get to finish because of some errors potentially. Thank you very much for joining me in this video, and stay tuned for more Motorsport Manager.